Hey, hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am Genesis Santiago, the Senior Government Relations Associate here at ACCT, and I'm so happy to be joined by Carrie Warwick Smith, the Vice President of Public Policy. And together we're going to talk about a very practical matter, which is how to have a meeting on the Hill, specifically how to schedule one on the Hill. And so, like I said, this is going to be more of a practical guide. And one of the reasons why it's so important to think about this is because these Hill meetings are an opportunity. It's a chance to really talk about the priorities that your college has with your members of Congress and their staff. And so, like I said, talking to your elected officials and policymakers is important if you're trying to elevate your goals as an institution. And so I really want to hand it over to Carrie and have her add more as to why Hill meetings are so critical.
Thank you, Genesis. So here at ACCT, we set a goal to encourage our colleges to interact with their congressional delegation at least 3 times per year. Uh, that helps build relationships and helps members of Congress think of your community college when they think of higher education. So there are a couple of different ways that you can have these touch points. You can do them in person here in Washington, D.C., where our offices are. You can do them in your district office or on campus. So there's the local in-person option, the DC in-person option, or you can do them virtually. So for the Washington, D.C. option, each year, ACCT in partnership with AACC hosts the Community College National Legislative Summit, usually the second week or so in February. And as part of that meeting, we encourage, really there's content, but there's also the Hill meetings. And so as part of that event, we would ask all of our colleges to schedule meetings with their members of Congress or their staff members, but to ideally at least invite the member of Congress to participate in the meeting. And that is a very specific process. And so one of the things we're going to talk about today is how to do that, not just why it's important. We have many resources on ACCT Connect, including our Advocacy 101 series that dives into why it's more important and or why it's important. And we will also have a webinar in January revealing our top legislative agenda items. But today we're going to talk about the logistical process to make sure that you're able to get started before we release those legislative priorities the third week of January.
Yeah, and I think that's great, Carrie. I feel like that's a wonderful segue to really the first question, right? And it's sort of the concept of how do I start, right? So if you have someone that has never done this before, and they're really trying to get their bearings, really the first question is, what should the invitation even say, right? And who does it go to? So I know that's a two-part question. So let's start with the first part. What should the invitation to a member of Congress say?
Excellent. So the first part about what does the invitation say? It should introduce the college. It should, very briefly, like one paragraph max of uh, the college, the relationship between the college and the member of Congress, the attendees in the meeting. Is it a president, trustee, student government president, employer partner? What is the combination of individuals who be in the room? And then who you want to meet with, ideally the member of Congress or the senator. And then make it very clear that you were there to talk about higher education and appropriations, because the staff members who are in the meeting should have education and or appropriations in their portfolio.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I think that's very helpful, right? And I want to emphasize what you said, which is ideally you want to make sure that the staffer who handles education policy is there. And normally that's the person who would write the memo at the end of the week letting the member of Congress know what the meeting was about if the member or the senator was not able to attend, right? So this person is very crucial. Um, and then I know you said that like within the body of the email, because really the recommended format here is to reach out via email. You're explaining who or what your institution is, what your college is, the relationship to the member. And then I imagine that you also want to include other details, such as the issues that you want to talk about. So, are you trying to talk about workforce development? Are you trying to talk about C campus? Are you trying to talk about the Pell Grant? I imagine that you also want to include a list of attendees. So, is there any other details that would be helpful to include in this meeting request?
Um, I, I think the final piece is to make sure that you list when you're going to be in town. If I didn't say that the first time, obviously
Right.
the dates of avail and times of availability. You want to give as big of windows as possible. Um, it's also helpful to mention that you're coming as part of the Community College National Legislative Summit. There may be, we there may be multiple colleges reaching out to the member of Congress or the senator, especially on the Senate side, where they're representing a whole state. So if an office receives multiple invitations, they may try to organize a group meeting or something along those lines. I think on that flag, if you are in a state with a system that will be represented or an association, particularly for the Senate side meetings, there might be someone in your state who's helping to coordinate a group meeting for a senator and all of the colleges so that the senator's not getting 10 or so requests. We don't see that really as often on the House side, but can definitely happen on the Senate side. But so you want to introduce the college, include the list of participants, include the topics, include the National Legislative Summit and the dates you are available, and the relationship between the college and the member of Congress. And what I mean by that is the college in the district? Or is the college serving students who are constituents of the member? And so both types of relationships should be considered because congressional districts and service districts for community colleges don't always align. So you certainly have your member of Congress's your member for your location of your main campus, but you might draw students from other congressional districts, or you might have branch campuses in other districts.
Right, exactly. And so that's the interesting thing about congressional maps versus how expansive a college can be. Like you said, there could be satellite campuses that cover numerous congressional districts, and so you might see yourself sending a request to numerous offices. And so you mentioned that obviously a key detail here to mention is that this is part of our National Legislative Summit and it's part of that event in February. And so really the follow-up question here is what would you recommend in terms of how far in advance to request this type of meeting?
So I would normally request this type of meeting 4 or 5 weeks in advance. That's what I'd call the happy medium.
Mhm.
Congressional members' schedules can change depending on when votes are happening on the floor or when they're traveling, when they have to spend time fundraising. So you want to make sure that you're in touch far enough in advance that their schedule isn't already booked. But you also don't want to if you reach out too far in advance, like 8, 10 weeks, it's possible that you'll be told that it's too far out and they don't know what the member's schedule looks like at that point, so they don't know how to commit to that time. And I think this is maybe a good time as I say this very vague they. The they in this case is the scheduler. So each member of
Yes.
Congress and each senator has a staff member whose either entire job or a significant portion of their job is to serve as their scheduler. So the best way, when we say you're writing this email invitation, you want to be formal and professional, but you do not need to worry about like attaching a PDF letter on letterhead or that sort of thing. It can just be in the body of the email. You want it to be professional, you want it to be, but also succinct. And the best way to submit that is to call the office and ask for the email for the scheduler and then send it to the scheduler. If you have worked with that office before and you know a staff member's email, you should copy them. But if you don't, that's perfectly fine. This is a very common request. You are not, you know, this is how it is done. So it's very common to just call and ask this question. And if you're not sure about the phone number, it should be listed on your member of Congress's official.gov website for their DC office. You can also find it on the ACCT Action Center, but that one's just is going to give you the member of Congress based on the zip codes you put in. If you're have students coming from other congressional districts, you have to remember to put in zip codes from their districts, not just the home campus zip code.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing I do want to add is, and I appreciate that you kind of stole the question right out of me because I was going to
Ah,
ask you, who should you contact, right? Obviously, the scheduler. But one thing that I wanted to add is sometimes inboxes get full, sometimes offices get busy, especially if there's a high volume of work. And so if you send out your request, a week passes by, you hear nothing, obviously follow up in a very polite, professional manner, and simply ask, I reached out a week ago. I'm just curious to know the status of this request. And so, in other words, it's a very normal, natural thing to sort of nudge the scheduler a little bit if you're not hearing back right away.
absolutely. I mean, don't email them daily, but if it's
Right.
been a week or 10 days, you definitely want to re-up and get that to the top of their inbox.
Exactly, exactly. Okay, so we talked about sort of like the steps that you take to request the meeting itself, right? You write your email, you send it to the scheduler, you follow up if needed. And so now we're thinking about the meeting itself and really what to expect. And so really the question that goes along with that is how long does a meeting normally last? So what do we plan for? What do we prepare for? Because they're not always the same thing. And so what are your insights on all of that?
Yes. So the meeting will most likely be scheduled for 30 minutes. So that's what you want to plan for. But we also need to prepare for the fact that the meeting could be much shorter. So that is the most important piece. It is important to arrive a little early. The member may be running late. So it is possible the meeting will start late. It is also possible that once the meeting starts, the member may be able to stay for 15 minutes, but the staffer will stay for 30. So that means as you're thinking through the agenda and the flow and who's going to say what when for your meeting, you want to make sure that you get through your most important items first and that you have a good plan for who's going to talk first, who's going to talk second, who's in charge of which issue areas. If you have a student with you, you want to make sure you get the student involved early. Members of Congress always want to talk to the students. They might hijack your whole plan and just ask questions to the student. So also you need to be prepared for that, where the member of Congress starts asking lots of questions, and you need to make sure that you work in your key points there. So that's and we can go. There's lots of nuances and details we could go into that planning, but the short answer there is you plan for 30 minutes, but you prepare for the likelihood that you might only get 15.
Right, exactly. I mean, and it happens as well where you're in the middle of the meeting and a staffer might walk in saying, "Hey, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but you might have to wrap up your meeting in the next 2 minutes," right? And so uh just know that things on the Hill change constantly. And it's always good to be ready to pivot. And then, one question that I sort of want to throw at you and um and I would like to comment on this as well, is sort of like the tonality of the meeting, right? I don't know if we've ever like really talked about that. And I feel like some people, when they've never done this before, they sort of walk in with this idea that it's like a very formal presentation, right? Where, they have their informational materials ready to go. They already have like their speaking order, and it's again very, very formal. And so, is there, I guess you could say, are there any myths that you would like to debunk with that?
Yeah. That is a great question. And you're right, something I don't think we talk enough about in the trainings. Generally, these meetings are professional, but fairly conversational. Not necessarily informal, but very conversational. They're not presentations. You want it to be a back and forth. Yes, it is the job of the staffer and the member of Congress to listen as constituents, but you also want to engage them. It's also easy, I think, to get very nervous during these meetings, particularly if you have one of those members of Congress that you see on TV all the time, and then you're like, oh my goodness, here they are in person in front of me. I think it's important to remember that, they work for you. They're there, they are in government service. They're there to serve the college, and serve your community. Um, and they want to hear from you, and it's also a good way to engage with them. You can ask them questions. I'm always a proponent of inviting members of Congress to campus. You can tour, offer for them to see a new facility you've just opened that's impressive. Bonus points if it has some federal funding as part of it, because then you can point out why those grant dollars are, or investments from the federal government are important, and impactful. But you definitely want to prepare it as a conversation where, you're presenting information and to teach them about the campus if they're not familiar, and whichever issues you've decided are your top priorities for that meeting. But you also want to hear from them, and you want to have a give and take. Genesis, you also mentioned materials, and Genesis, you
Right.
worked on the Hill, so I'm gonna flip this around and ask you a
Oh,
question. Um, Talk about the size of the offices and the amount of storage space, filing systems, etc., that our Hill staffers have on Capitol
yes.
Hill.
Yes, I would love to talk about that because I have experienced all of this firsthand. And so in terms of how much space a staffer has, it's really the desk. That is their universe, like what the drawers of their desk. So essentially what I need to say by that is my desk when I used to work on the Hill was full of folders and packets and booklets of things that people would leave behind, right? And so really my goal always was to read through the booklets and the packets and everything. But realistically speaking, just with how busy the Hill can be, especially during high volume times, it was very difficult to make it back to some of the materials that were left behind. And so, really, the suggestion that I always give is bring something to leave behind, definitely, but make it one sheet of paper. And if it's double-sided, that's perfect. But the moment that we expand further beyond a sheet of paper, that's when that's when the probability of the staffer reviewing your materials decreases. So definitely, like I said, prepare your materials, have things to leave behind, but the moment that it's a whole booklet, it's unfortunately going to end up in a drawer somewhere. And then once that drawer gets full, the way mine would, it would have to get recycled. Because like you said, Carrie, the storage space is so limited, and these offices, depending on the building, are quite cramped. Um, so yeah, and then in terms of the materials itself, obviously make sure that you are highlighting institutional data, right? So demographic data, local economic impact data. If the meeting itself is about something very specific, maybe how a federal grant has impacted your campus, make sure that the sheet that you leave behind is mirroring that the information that you're leaving behind gives information on that federal grant and its impact. And then one thing that I also want to remind, and I feel like I'm talking so much about this. So one thing that I do want to add is if you're not able to secure that data right away, maybe you didn't have enough time, the turnaround time was too quick, that's fine. Because that is an opportunity to follow up later on. And like Carrie mentioned at the beginning, you want to create about 3 touch points per year with an office. So if you're able to follow up with new data, that's okay. Okay, do you
Yeah,
want to flip
that's
this back
that.
around, Carrie?
Yeah, no, that is a perfect way to tie it all together. I think the last piece I would just say on materials is a reminder that the NLS prep packet has a federal worksheet to help walk you through all of the sources of federal funding that your campus may receive. So that is either using that or just as a guide for information to include as you create that one pager. We do have resources for that. We also have some examples from some colleges who've put together kind of one piece of paper, front and back dashboards that I think are well done, and so we like to share those examples as well. But bringing it back to that touch point piece, you mentioned follow-ups, and so that's the another really important element of this is that after your meeting is over, you want to make sure that you follow up with whatever was discussed. At the very least, you want to send a thank you. But if you mentioned a campus visit, maybe coming in spring for graduation or a tour, a ribbon cutting, you want to make sure that you're following up on that. If there's a question that came up that you didn't have the answer to, it is much better to say, let me get back to you on that than it is to make something up and be wrong. So that also you can put any of that follow-up information in or answers to those questions in that follow-up email as well.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Okay, so before we wrap up, are there any other tips that you would like to share in terms of having a Hill meeting or things to think about as you're preparing for the Hill meeting, um, either in terms of logistics or what to do afterwards? So really, this is more of an open-ended question.
One is to close out with the too long didn't read version of quick takeaways. So I'll save that for last. But the other concern I just wanted to touch on, because we've already started receiving questions about this, is what happens if something interrupts NLS? And in most years we get the well, what if it snows question. And so the one of the silver linings, if you will call it that, from the pandemic and our growing comfort level with Zoom is that Hill staffers are now able to take virtual meetings. This was something that was completely unheard of in 2019 and before. The security and the cameras and the audio, et cetera, of what staffers were supplied with, it was just not functional. However, now here we are, 6 years later, after a year or whatever of remote work, and Hill members are actually quite adept at doing virtual meetings. So one, I would still say it is very importantly coming in person does send a big message about how important this is, and it's easier to build relationships in person. And so we still think that it is the first best choice to come meet in person. Plus, you get to hear from the speakers and network and do trainings and participate in all of the other content of NLS. However, if your flight gets canceled, if you are snowed in, etc., you should contact the office and let them know that. And if it's possible, offer to at least meet with the staffer virtually so that you can still get your talking points across, even if you don't get to participate in the rest of the pieces. Also, that helps build that relationship, and you can do virtual meetings anytime through the year, especially once you've established that conversation or that relationship with the staffer. I will say it's very rare, I think, for members of Congress themselves to do virtual meetings. They might join as a speaker to a large virtual function. They're probably not going to do this, kind of one-on-one type conversation that Genesis and I are having now, but the staffers will do it. So that's the snow question, and that comes up every year.
Yeah.
Um, the added complication layer this year is that Congress passed a continuing resolution that allowed the government to exit the shutdown, fund and continue to operate at fiscal year 25 levels. And in many years throughout my career, when I've seen Congress do this, they frequently set the deadline right before Christmas because they want to motivate themselves to get it done so they can go home for the holidays. I think this year, given the length of the shutdown and the timing and the fact that the government really didn't reopen until about a week before Thanksgiving, they knew that that would not be enough time. And so they passed the continuing resolution to January 30th, which means the next deadline for a possible government shutdown will be January 30th. So, first and foremost, we have our webinar planned for about a week before that. We'll have a pretty good idea by then whether Congress is going to meet the deadline and pass all of the bills, whether they're going to need to do another CR, or whether it is possible that we could have a second shutdown this fiscal year. If that's the case, members of Congress are each in charge of whether or not their offices continue to stay open and operate. So we will have to make a judgment call at that time, but it is very possible that even if the agencies are not operating, that Congress will still be operating. It's also possible that if the Labor, Health and Human Services and Education bill is passed, but some other bills aren't, that the Departments of Education and Labor are open, but other agencies are closed. And in that situation, where it's a partial shutdown, we know that Congress is almost likely still operating. And we have had 3 of the 12 appropriations bills already passed and are completed through the end of fiscal year 26. So I would say stay tuned on that front, but we should all follow normal operating procedures to prepare for NLS. And you should make sure you're signed up for our twice weekly latest action in Washington updates and registering for our January 22nd webinar because that's where we will have the latest information on that front.
Right. Well, and just really out of curiosity and just getting your insight here, Carrie, outside of NLS, as colleges are requesting more meetings again because we want them to create touch points and really nourish a relationship with these offices. Um, During a shutdown, I would imagine that they should try to reach out anyways, just because there's each office is different in terms of their willingness to have meetings, especially with constituents.
Yes, I mean that is a great point, and that's a good difference that um, advocates or others in the space might not be able to get into an office, but a direct constituent would be still be able to get a meeting, especially a virtual meeting with the staffer. And during the last shutdown, as we started to hear of impacts on campuses because of lack of access to funding in various ways, it's important for Congress to hear exactly how the shutdown is impacting the campus and the students. So reaching out during that time is almost more important than ever, or at least just as important as during normal times.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, okay. So, for me, a few things that come to mind in terms of like a few tips or tricks or just things to consider, I would say always do your research on your member of Congress. Know the committees that that person sits on. So, for instance, if they sit on the Education and Workforce Committee, that is a critical committee for the work that we do. But it's also helpful in terms of guiding the conversation. Um, and obviously, if there's a particular bill that is being discussed, it's important to know where that bill is in the legislative process, just so that way the meeting can really be productive and it's accurate in terms of where the bill of how the bill is moving, that is. And then really the final note, and I don't know if Carrie would like to add anything, take
Well, I
pictures,
didn't do
right?
my too long didn't read version yet, so that's what we're going to
Oh,
close out
yes,
with.
yes. But yeah, no, I was just gonna say take pictures, post on social media, and
Yes,
send those
yes.
pictures to two people, right? So send the pictures to us at ACCT. We would love to have them and really uplift the work that you're doing with your college. And also send the pictures to the scheduler because that person will probably send it to the comms person in the office. But Carrie, I'll give the floor to
Yeah,
you.
no, that is really important. Tag us, tag your member of Congress. If you can email them to us, that helps us because we've got a better file. But send them to the scheduler as well because then um, the they can pass them to the other appropriate staff in the office who may use them for the members' publicity. So you've made it to the end. Um, you can pause, you can go back, maybe you took notes, but here is my like top takeaway. We should probably write this down in a handout. We can do that for everyone. But you've registered for NLS, you've booked your hotel, you've booked your flight. Now you're prepared to do your meetings. You're back in the office on January 5th after the winter break. So the first step is to make the list of every member of Congress that you want to meet with. That should definitely include both of your senators. It should include the House member that represents your main campus, uh, the House members that represent your satellite campuses, and the House members that represent any of your service area. So they have students so you have students who are their constituents. These lists are going to be different lengths depending on who you are. If you are in a state that only has 2 or 3 congressional seats, you might only have one on your list, or maybe you have all three. If you are in an urban area, especially one that's highly gerrymandered, I'm looking at you, Austin, Texas, you could have 8 or 10 House members on your list. So it will be different for everyone. Once you have your list, you want to call their DC offices. So that could be 10 or 12 phone calls, but they'll be very quick ones, and ask for the scheduler's email. Once you have the email, you want to compose your message requesting the meeting. This message is going to be virtually the same for all of the offices. You're going to introduce the college, say that you'll be in town for the Community College National Legislative Summit, list the topics you want to talk about, list who's in the room, and list your availability for the meeting. You're going to hit send on that. If you don't hear back in a week or 10 days, you're going to follow up. You're going to keep following up until you have the meeting scheduled. And then in your prep leading up to NLS, you're going to join the webinar on January 22nd, or you're going to watch the recording afterwards. You'll be able to download our front back one pager that we call the green sheet because it's on green paper, to see what the issues we're recommending for this year. You're going to pick the top 2 or 3 for your campus, and then you're going to coordinate with the folks who are in your meeting who is going to cover which of the topics. And then when you're here, you will be plan for a 30-minute meeting, but be prepared to hit your top points in 15 minutes and know your number one ask. So if that staffer comes in and says, hey, we got to wrap up in 2 minutes, that's your moment to say, I've got one more thing. This is it. Say it, and thank you for your time. And then when you go home, you are going to send your follow-up thank you email and include any invitations or information that was discussed during the meeting. How'd I do?
Excellent. We could have just done that the whole time.
Yeah.
That is
Oh,
perfect.
well, hopefully we added in some other tidbits that people find helpful.
Exactly. Well, okay, with that, I will close by highlighting a few things. So, number one, please check out our NLS page. We have resources there for you. Some of those resources include more expanded versions of the conversation that we had today. Please also email us with any questions at publicpolicy@acct.org. And I would also say, Carrie mentioned this at the top, but also log into ACCT Connect. That's where we have a variety of resources. Included within those resources would be the 101 series that we did that also talks about scheduling meetings and things to expect. And so, yeah, with that, I think that that wraps up this conversation.
Mhm.
I do want to highlight that we are excited to see you all in February for NLS,
Yes.
but also take this as a resource for other times that you want to schedule meetings, because the more you can reach out to your members of Congress, the better. Of
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Genesis.
course, thank you, Carrie.
Bye, everyone.